Welcome to episode 53 of Fascinating, a Star Trek podcast. The Ultimate Computer.
In this week's episode, Kirk is emasculated when Dr. Richard Daystrom installs a new computer system on the Enterprise, designed to take command decisions flawlessly. Inevitably, all does not go to plan, but can the crew regain control of their ship before the computer destroys multiple Starfleet vessels, or will they be forced to watch their colleagues destroyed?
Please, Spock, do me a favor, and don't say it's fascinating. No. But it is interesting.
How are we, Ian?
Not too bad, Gerry. How are you?
Interested?
Welcome to episode 1 of Interesting.
A Star Wars podcast.
You like Richard Daystrom?
He was alright, he was a bit of a chancer.
You think so?
Well, yeah. When he was pulled up, things started going wrong. It's like, it's okay, it's a little fault, I can sort this. He was grasping.
A little bit there.
All sorts of trouble. Couldn't admit it or accept it.
I did like although it was still a man versus machine episode, it was quite different from the ones that we saw in like Taste of Armageddon, Square of Gothos, and then Landru from Return of the Archons, where the computers are taking over whole planets or running elaborate deceptions. It was more of a contained experiment.
Mm-hmm. I must admit to finding their attitude slightly confusing.
In what way?
The whole sort of premise of the show, the characters, is about technology. It's about embracing change and developing upon what we already have. So I thought that their attitude towards this change was almost sort of Luddite-ish, which was odd. I didn't expect it. And it's not just because they're not going from manual operations. It's not the first jump from manual operations to computerization. It's just an iterative step. I don't think there should have been that. It's certainly in hundreds of years' time. The AI that we have today is obviously far in advance of what they have then. Yeah. I didn't think it was authentic.
I didn't see the purpose. If you're going to have this computer that runs all these ships, so you don't need any people in them, that takes away. Sure, one of the major bonuses of going out into far space and human-controlled ships is that people get to see stuff.
Yes, no, I don't think they're doing it for the benefit of the crew. I think that...
No, but that's a benefit of what they're doing.
Yeah, but it's not for Kirk's benefit. It's not so that people like the crew can see what's going on. I think, that in fairness to them, you can send out unmanned crafts who can scope out what they find, the lie of the land, and report back. If it's safe enough, then they can send manned...
But, they already can have that. We saw there's an unmanned ship in this episode.
Yeah.
And they've always used probes and stuff like that.
That's true.
Anyway, no doubt we'll find out more of these things when we get into this.
Yeah, I think we can chat through it in a bit more detail as we progress.
Let's do that then.
Let's crack on.
We begin in your happy place on the bridge.
Kirk receives a communication from Commodore Enright on board the space station that they have just approached.
Yeah, he seems a bit edgy, Kirk, at this point.
Angry, I thought, yeah.
Yeah, he demands an explanation for why they've been ordered here.
And he's told to get that explanation in the form of a man who's beaming aboard right now. So we head down to the transporter room where a yellow shirt materialises and Kirk begins to introduce him to Spock as Commodore Bob Wesley.
You mind telling me what this is all about? I receive orders to proceed here, no reason given. I'm informed that my men will be removed to the space station to a security holding area. I think I'm entitled to an explanation.
You've had a singular honor conferred on you, Jim. You're going to be the fox in the hunt.
What's that?
War games. I'll be commanding the attack force against you.
An entire attack force against my ship?
Have you heard of the M5 Multitronic unit?
That's, Dr. Richard Daystrom's device, isn't it? Tell me about that.
The most ambitious computer complex ever created. Its purpose is to correlate all computer activity aboard a starship to provide the ultimate in vessel operation and control.
How do you know so much about it, Commander?
I hold an A7 computer expert classification, Commodore. I'm well acquainted with Dr. Daystrom's theories and discoveries. The basic design of all our ship's computers are Dr. Daystром's.
What has all this got to do with the Enterprise, Commodore?
You've been chosen to test the M5, Jim. There'll be a series of routine research and contact problems for the M5 to solve, plus navigational maneuvers and the war games problem. Now, if the M5 works under actual conditions as well as it has under simulated tests, it will mean a revolution in space technology as great as warp drive. When your crew has been removed, the ship's engineering section will be modified to contain the computer.
Why remove my crew?
They're not needed.
How much security does this gadget require?
None. Dr. Daystrom will see to the installation himself, and he'll supervise the tests. When he's ready, you'll receive your orders and proceed on the mission with a crew of 20.
I'm not sure why the crew has to go into a secure holding area.
No, they could hang about, couldn't they?
You'd think they would give them some shore leave or something.
Yeah.
Anyway, Kirk protests that 20 men is far too few to run his ship, but Wesley insists it can be done with M5 making the decisions, and all Kirk needs to do is sit back and let it work.
We are then presented with the credits, followed by Captain's Log 4729.4.
Yeah, we've skipped ahead. The computer's now been installed on board, and they've left the space station to begin these tests.
In the turbo lift, McCoy is not comfortable with the situation as you would expect and doesn't want to be part of the test, which is described by Spock as attempting to show the ship can be run more effectively by a computer than man.
Yes, Spock and McCoy, as you might imagine, are bickering about this idea, and Spock comes up with a jibe that they should invent a computer that replaces the surgeon. And this actually happens in a future in Star Trek Voyager. Okay. The Doctor's a hologram.
At this point, actually, I noticed that McCoy says, yeah, very funny, but it's clearly ADR'd in because his lips don't move, so it couldn't have been in the original script. Or
Really?
Yeah.
Once they're out in the corridor, he says he wouldn't need replaced, he'd resign.
Yeah.
Because all the people would be machines as well. And then Kirk's been walking with them, but he's not said anything much.
No, I think at this point he notes that it's meant to be an honour.
Yeah, he sounds a bit sarcastic though, doesn't he? He says, I'm honoured.
Yeah, and he's obviously... See, this doesn't strike me as how Kirk would react to his authority being challenged.
Well, I get the feeling that he doesn't understand why he feels the way he's feeling about it. I think he questions it with McCoy later on, that he knows that he should be fine, but he's uneasy. He doesn't know why.
You would also think as well that he'd have a bit more advance warning.
Yeah, it seems a bit... There's no reason to spring this on them.
Yeah. Look, this could be months, years in advance in terms of planning.
Yeah.
Anyway, down in engineering.
Yeah.
They arrive and Kirk introduces McCoy and Spock to Dr. Daystrom, which is apparently an honour for Spock.
Yeah, Daystrom tells Kirk that he needs to hook the computer up to main power, but that Scotty won't allow it without a direct order from the captain.
And again, this is another instance where Scotty would have already been informed about this.
Well, you would think, yeah, you just need to wait for the captain to literally show up in the room.
No, but this was all happening as the M5 is being hooked up.
Yeah. There'd
be an internal briefing for all...
Yeah, Dr. Daystrom's coming down and let him do what he needs to do.
Yeah, he's got carte blanche. I mean, the whole crew would have been informed about what's going on and why.
Yeah. We get a bit of exposition from Spock.
Do we? Tell me.
He explains that this new computer has huge potential, going far beyond work that Daystrom has previously been recognised for. And Daystrom takes issue with this.
In what way?
He says it's not potential, it's a fact that this computer has this capacity, and it shouldn't be looked as a test, it's more of a proof.
Yeah, but McCoy admits he is still concerned that if things go wrong, there are insufficient people on board to run the ship. Now, this causes the nervous-looking Daystrom to ask who McCoy is and suggest that he shouldn't be there.
Yeah, Kirk has to explain that McCoy has full security clearance throughout the ship.
Yeah, he then has to deal with a few minor adjustments that are necessary as the computer is hooking up before Kirk asks him why it's called the M5 and not the M1.
Yes, and a sort of momentarily sheepish Daystrom explains that the M1 through M4 were not successful.
Now, this is meant to demonstrate that things can go wrong, but anyone with any sort of, even basic understanding of how software or anything he's developed,
Yeah.
you'd expect this. You certainly do not want
The first
the
version.
first version. You want things to have gone wrong, and you say, okay, now we've ironed out the bugs, the problems.
That's it.
So it's not. I don't think this is an example of what they think it is.
No. Then we get a weird line from Kirk who says that there are certain things men must do to remain men.
Yeah, I mean, it is weird. It's a sort of philosophical rambling, isn't it? And I understand what he's saying, but this is what I was sort of getting at earlier on. It's more. This is the type of thing that in our century or previous centuries, when the very first examples of automation came into place, and what it did do, it did, I suppose, emasculate men who had previously looked after their families, provided for. Suddenly they were out of
their
job.
status was gone.
Their
Yeah.
status was gone. But 200 or 300 years in the future, they should understand this is how it happens now. It shouldn't be a shock that a computer's running a spaceship. I mean, these days you wouldn't. Even today, a plane, effectively a pilot, doesn't do very much. He's there as a backup.
We're not far off cars being self-driving.
No, we're not far off at all. We've got them. It's just a case of this implementation and the sort of logistics and the technical aspect of. And not even just that. I think it's more to do with the politics and the trust and the infrastructure.
Yeah.
But the technology's there already. Yeah.
Anyway, Daystrom takes up this angle and accuses Kirk of fearing a loss of status, a loss of prestige, and that's why he's upset about the computer.
I think that's quite accurate, yeah. You don't have to be very perceptive to understand that. And at this, Kirk storms off with McCoy and he tells him that they are here to prove that the computer can do all that he can without the need for ceremony.
Out in the corridor, McCoy picks up on Kirk's unease, and initially he thinks it's because of this whole idea of men being replaced by machines that they've discussed in previous episodes, but Kirk explains that it's more than that.
Yeah. Also, sorry, did McCoy not have a go at Spock as well? Did he noticed the sort of fawning?
I think he has a couple of these where he says Spock's found a computer that he's in love with and things like this. So Kirk's problem is he thinks, or he's got this gut instinct, that this computer is dangerous. It's a bit of a leap.
It is.
And he gets into this sort of unwinnable argument with McCoy about whether his psych profiles say he's afraid of losing his job. And McCoy talks about the advances of mechanisation, but says the feeling is different when it's your job on the line and not the other guy.
Yeah. I mean, that's fair enough. It's accurate. But again, I think that none of this you wouldn't implement this like what they're doing here.
No.
All of a sudden turning up and saying, oh, do you know what? We're trying something here and all your jobs might be made redundant if it all goes well, so get used to it.
An unmanned fleet.
Yeah, you wouldn't do that. It'd be a longer process.
You would think so.
And you would have seen it coming. The technology isn't. It's just another step in Daystrom.
Well, this seems to be a leap. Yeah, Daystrom's made this leap from these computers that interact with you to computers that don't need you anymore.
In any case, Kirk continues with the questioning of his own necessity and whether he does put too much stock in the pomp and prestige that goes with his position. But McCoy points out that having this awareness to ask or contemplate such a thing proves that he doesn't have to answer it.
Well, at least it proves that he has self-awareness and that he's capable of figuring out a solution.
Yeah, I think it actually says that McCoy doesn't have to answer it himself. He should ask James T. Kirk.
Yes, and trust his answer.
Yeah. Anyway, back up in the bridge.
Yeah, Captain's chair has had a modification. There's a new box on it with 2 switches and a couple of wee lights.
Okay. Is that for the M5?
Yep, so Kirk flips one of the switches to disengage the M5, so it seems like it's doing certain tasks and then Kirk's turning it off in between.
Yeah, again, it's almost as if he's doing this when he feels like it. Like, that's enough, I'll now take over.
Well, that's exactly what's happening because Daystrom picks him up on this.
Yeah, he shouldn't. There'll be a set procedure and protocol here. We're doing tests. You can't just decide, right, I've had enough.
I suppose, Kirk's interpreted his orders as a series of tests rather than one big test. Whereas Daystrom and Spock think it's more of a ongoing process that they should be leaving the computer to handle.
Sulu notes that they are coming back on their original course as Spock states in front of Daystrom that the computer has performed admirably.
Kirk undermines that slightly by saying these were very basic tasks that even Sulu and Chekhov could have managed in their sleep.
Yeah, sure, but that's the point. It's basic tasks, that's what we're here for as well, yeah?
Yeah, automate them.
Well, if you can do it in your sleep, yeah, but we don't need you to do it in your sleep, you can go somewhere else.
Yeah. Daystrom at this point, like I said, discourages Kirk from disengaging the machine between tasks, and Spock further expresses his support for Daystrom's position and says he is impressed with the computer, and this is another distinguished triumph for the Doctor's career.
Brown noser, isn't He loves Daystrom. He wants to marry him. Kirk, however, says he will decide how long the M5 is in control for and will run his ship in his own way.
Turns out they're approaching Alpha Carinae 2, and Daystrom reminds Kirk that he must allow M5 to deal with the approach, orbit, and landing party recommendations. Yeah,
and I think Kirk's getting a bit tetchy with Spock. Like I said earlier on, I think Spock's went too far in his admiration for the Dr. Daystrom. I think Kirk tells Spock that, or he notes that he seems to enjoy having the M5 in control, but he claims he is merely gratified to see the M5 work so efficiently, which reflects well on the distinguished Daystrom, who he loves.
After getting this advice from Daystrom, Kirk insists on making his own landing party recommendations, and once they've achieved standard orbit, gets a report from Spock that this is a Class M planet with 2 major land masses and a number of islands.
They're all Class M's, aren't they?
Well, all the ones that they go to, because there's no point in them going to the ones they can't beam down to. There are also people on the planet.
However, a worried Scotty then reports systems have shut down on Deck 4 as Kirk makes his recommendation as to what they should do next without input from the M5.
Yes, he suggests a general survey party that avoids contact with intelligent life on the planet, which would consist of himself, Dr. McCoy, Spock, and then Phillips and Rollins.
Yeah, I think Phillips is an astrobiologist, whilst Rollins is a geologist. Scotty then warns of level 5 shutting down, as Daystrom insists on hearing the M5's recommendation, and it differs in the personnel who he believes, or it believes, should be sent down.
Yes, it suggests just Spock, Phillips, and a guy called Carstairs.
Now, Kirk, he tries to brush this off as a simple judgment call, but Spock, again, sides with his boyfriend and states that the M5 doesn't judge, it simply makes decisions based on logic.
Kirk questions its choice of an ensign over the chief geologist, and M5 is asked to explain its decision.
Yeah, and after giving the rationale for that, it then gives a brutal assessment for the exclusion of Kirk and McCoy.
Yes, they're non-essential on this mission.
Yeah.
Well, that's fair enough. I don't necessarily agree that Carstairs over Rollins is an absolute right or wrong situation.
No.
He's been there before, yes, but the other guy is the chief geologist, so I think you could argue that either way.
You could.
Anyway, and like you said, in the middle of that, power went down in Deck 5, and Scotty has now discovered it's M5 doing it. It's shutting down systems all over the ship.
So, we're down in engineering. Daystrom is quite relaxed about things. He explains that the M5 was just conserving power from the areas that did not require it. I think that seems fair enough.
It's a feature, not a bug.
Yeah. Again, this is the type of thing. It seems as if no one's explained the plan to the crew here.
Well, even Daystrom doesn't seem to have understood that this was normal.
Why was this not all detailed? This is what's going to happen. They'll be removed. We don't have the full crew here, so we don't need the power. Yeah. It's sensible. I mean, that's from a environmental point of view as well. That's what happened. You know, you close down the heat and the lights when you're not in a room.
That does seem logical.
It does, yeah.
Spock, however, is starting to move off his original position. You get the first hints of it here. He notes that the M5 is drawing more power than originally it did.
Yeah, he gives the example of the human body needing more power for different activities, causing both Spock and Kirk to drastically miss his point and start talking about how a computer can't make decisions based on intuition. But it's not intuition at all.
No. Spock also doesn't seem persuaded by what Daystrom had to say here. It's sort of a turning point, I think.
Mm-hmm. I think, again, this, sorry to harp on about it, but this it's so clear that this is the 60s writing and not 300 years in advance. They're talking about intuition and how we can't...
Yeah.
You can hear the frustration in Daystrom.
Yes, he says, he strongly defends the M5 and says this is a whole new approach and that the existing systems are archaic by comparison.
I'm slightly disappointed in Spock not understanding this.
Yeah, you think he'd be able to get his head around it.
Yeah. Anyway, at this point, they're interrupted by Uhura.
Yes, there's an unidentified vessel mirroring their course, so Kirk says he'll be up presently.
On the bridge, Spock and Kirk arrive to find McCoy kicking his heels as sickbay has been shut down.
Yes, M5 won't give it any power until there's patience.
Again, yeah, that seems fine.
Yeah. Spock reports contact with 2 ships, one either side at 200,000 kilometres and closing.
What are they? Who are they?
It's the Excalibur and the Lexington.
Yeah, he notes that they are not scheduled for war games, but it may be a surprise attack to test the M5. So, the ships are put on audio, and Commodore Wesley from the Lexington confirms it is an unscheduled drill for the M5.
Before Uhura can acknowledge that, M5 has already done so and put the ship to red alert.
And to the delight of Daystrom, who has joined them, and the probable dismay of Kirk, they see that the M5 is able to see off the aggressors with ease and efficiency.
Yeah, Kirk at the start of the battle had ordered Sulu to set phasers to 1%, so that was fine. There was no damage done, and they won the fight, essentially.
Daystrom's obviously very pleased with himself, and Spock confirms to Kirk that the machine reacted in a more sophisticated manner than a human could have.
Kirk says it was impressive and maybe practical, and here Spock does a complete U-turn. He says that maybe, but it would not be desirable because computers cannot command loyalty like a captain.
But you don't need loyalty if it's just the computer.
Yeah, listen, the idea that you're replacing just the captain and not the rest of the crew makes no sense. You'd replace everybody.
Yeah. Let's say loyalty isn't a thing that it shouldn't be based on loyalty, because what happens is, and we've seen before, if the captain makes a dubious decision, everyone else just follows in behind because of loyalty. But someone should be standing up and saying, no, that's the wrong decision. And there shouldn't be a fear of rank being able to, and that's how it happens at the moment. You know, you obey the captain, he's got the final word. But if he's wrong, then the whole chain collapses because no one's there to
challenge him. Wesley comes back on comms and says that both of the other ships took enough hits to award victory to the Enterprise. At this point, Kirk secures the message just to the people on the bridge, and Wesley compliments the M5 and refers to Kirk as Captain Dunsel.
Oh, which makes him straighten up and leave the bridge without saying a word. And it is left to Spock to explain.
Yes, apparently it's a term that they use at Starfleet Academy to refer to parts that serve no useful purpose.
That was a bit of a dick move by Wesley.
Absolutely.
There's no need for that at all.
No, he's the one that set this up.
Yeah, why would you insult him? It's bad enough that he might be losing his job, but rubbing it in front of everyone, calling him a dunsel.
Yeah.
Sounds like a dunce.
Just mean.
Yeah. Very disrespectful.
Yeah. There's a good visual here after that where we get a pan to the unoccupied captain's chair with the M5 controls flashing away on the arm.
Yeah, reinforces the point.
Yeah.
Over in Kirk's quarters, and realising that he must be hurt, McCoy joins him to try and cheer him up, even though he isn't interested in eating.
This isn't chicken soup. I may be just a ship's doctor, but I make a Finnegal's Folly that's known from here to Orion. I strongly prescribe it, Jim.
You know, I've never felt this way before. At odds with the ship. I sat there and watched my ship perform for a mass of circuits and relays and felt useless. Unneeded. To Captain Dunsel.
To James T. Kirk, Captain of the Enterprise.
Thank you, Doctor. That's one of your better prescriptions.
Simple, but effective.
Do you know the one? All I ask is a tall ship.
It's a line from a poem, a very old poem, isn't it?
20th century Earth. All I ask is a tall ship and a star to steer by. You could feel the wind at your back in those days. The sounds of the sea beneath you. And even if you take away the wind and the water, it's still the same. The ship is yours. You can feel her. And the stars are still there, Bones.
Captain Kirk, to the bridge, please. Captain Kirk.
Was he drinking green there?
It looked like he got inebriated fairly quickly.
Yeah, because he was rambling a lot of old drunk talk.
Yeah. Anyhow, Spock comes on comms now and reports another contact with a ship. It's not a drill, it's unidentified, and Kirk says he'll head up to the bridge.
Where the M5 has identified it as the Woden, an old-style freighter ship with no crew.
Yeah, Sulu and Chekhov report that shields have come up and speed is increasing.
Yeah, I think they bring it up on the screen.
Yeah, Kirk orders Daystrom be brought to the bridge immediately and tries to disengage the M5 to reduce speed and give the ore freighter a wide berth.
Yes, he tells Scotty, I think, to reverse the engine, but he is unable to make the alterations. And then Daystrom does arrive, and Kirk points out that the controls are locked and demands that they be released. But before he can respond, Spock notes that the photons are locked on target and are launched.
Yeah, Kirk tries to run over to Sulu's station, but he has no success there either, and urges Daystrom to release the computer's control, but it's too late. The Woden is destroyed.
Yeah, luckily it was unmanned, eh?
Yeah, but still. Anyway, original course and speed is resumed, and Spock says all systems are now reporting normal.
And the slightly sheepish Daystrom admits that there appears to be a small defect in the control panel. And I said at the start of the podcast, Daystrom is always, he's not one for just saying, yeah, there's a problem here, I'll resolve it. He always tries to pretend that it's not a big deal, and yeah, this is to be expected.
He's quite invested in the project.
Far too much. I mean, I think if he could have, he'd have built an Andrea.
At this point, McCoy gets a bit personal, accusing Daystrom of being individually responsible for the computer's actions.
Yeah, both Kirk and McCoy give him both barrels as he tries to play down what's happened by saying, yeah, it was just an unmanned robot ship. But Kirk is not interested, and again tells him to disengage the M5, and also tells Uhura to let the Starfleet know what's happened.
Yes, and then he insists that Daystrom come to engineering with him.
Yeah, telling him the M5 is out of a job. Not sure if he's got that authority to...
He's still the captain.
Sure, but he's been told by Starfleet, listen, you're not, this is what's happening.
Yeah, but he just blew up a ship. It's obviously not
working. Not his ship. Anyway, down in engineering, they walk in and Kirk tells him to turn off the computer, but is immediately blasted to the ground. How was he blasted to the ground?
It's a force field he walked into.
That's it, yeah.
Daystrom denies responsibility for this, and Spock says it looks like M5 is protecting itself.
This is like Superman 3.
Is that what happens there?
There is a computer, yeah, that starts to take over. It won't be shut down.
It happens in the second season of Discovery as well. There's a lot of stuff with AI trying to take things over and protect itself from being discovered.
Sure. Captain's log 4731.3. Just a short recap. Don't think we learn anything new.
No, it just says that the computer's in control.
Yeah, we knew that.
We're still in engineering, and Kirk's still agitated.
He's quite aggressive, I think. He demands a solution from Daystrom, who is unsuccessfully trying to play down the whole thing as a minor inconsistency that can be corrected.
Scotty suggests turning it off at the wall, and Kirk agrees over Daystrom's objection. It's becoming apparent at this point how much Daystrom has invested in the success of his creation. He can't bear the idea it might fail.
Yeah, he acts like a concerned lover and asks for a few moments with it before Kirk restrains him and tells Scotty to go and do what he has to do.
Yeah, so Scotty and an engineer go to unplug the M5, but it doesn't go to plan.
Yeah, what happens?
The M5 disintegrates the engineer,
causing Kirk to rage at Daystrom.
He says it's just an accident. Stop overreacting.
Yeah, and killing red shirts is his job.
Yeah.
No computer's got to take over that. I can do that perfectly well myself, thank you very much.
Kirk did order him to go over there. So.
Yeah. He tries to excuse it by saying that it wasn't deliberate and that the red shirt simply got... I mean, he's victim blaming here. It's his own fault. He got in the way.
He was asking for it.
Yeah.
Spock at this point notes that M5 is now drawing power from the warp engines themselves.
Yeah, and Scotty panics as it has now access to unlimited power. Kirk, I think he leaves at this point asking Scotty and McCoy to come with him to the briefing room.
I think Scotty and Spock, but yeah.
What did I say?
McCoy.
One of them.
Yeah,
Two of them.
They're all wearing blue. In the briefing room, Spock gives a quick recap.
And McCoy has joined them.
McCoy is there. He's senior staff. Kirk notes that they're about an hour out from the scheduled wargame rendezvous. Yeah,
and I think Spock does suggest that there may be a chance to override the automatic helm navigation relays from engineering level 3. And Scotty confirms that he could do it in under an hour with Spock's help.
Kirk says to do it sooner than that, and McCoy asks where Daystrom's gone.
Kirk tells him that he is watching the M5 and apparently even he was surprised at what it did. He shouldn't be left alone with this machine.
No. Spock says it's illogical for him to have been surprised, as he should know how the computer that he programmed would perform in certain circumstances.
Yeah, is that the clip we heard at the top of the podcast?
It is. It's not behaved logically, and it's not so much fascinating as interesting.
Back down in engineering, the M5 is still drawing power. I quite like the effect of it drawing this energy.
Yeah, I think we got a brief interlude at the Jeffries tube there first, where Scotty and Spock are hard at work before we head into engineering. Yeah, McCoy is here harassing Daystrom.
Yeah, he's quite aggressive as well. He asks if he has found a solution to shut it off, and Daystrom really starts to get weird here.
Yeah, he says you don't terminate a child when it makes a mistake, and you need to let M5 learn.
Yeah, but McCoy says, yeah, he's learning to kill.
It reminded me a bit of the scene in The Apple with the melon and the blades when he was trying to teach all the other villagers to kill.
Thwack. Daystrom denies this and says that it's just defending itself. Listen, get him at this point. We need to get him out of here. He's defending itself. And like a child, it will eventually learn to think independently. What do you mean eventually learn?
It's developing beyond its original programming, so you can't predict what it's going to do. And McCoy says it's a danger to everybody and needs to be terminated.
But Daystrom simply patronises him and tells him that he is frightened because he can't understand it, and he'll show all of them.
Yes, he's going to prove you don't need humans on a starship, you just need computers. And nobody else ever needs to die on an alien planet or in space, and they can achieve greater things. That seems to me like quite a subjective goal.
Yeah.
What greater things? What is it he wants man to achieve that's bigger and better? We don't have to worry about space exploration anymore. We can focus on planting tomatoes.
We find ourselves in the vent. What did you call it?
Kirk's quarters, I think.
No, before that.
The Jeffries tube.
Jeffries tube, yeah. We see Scotty and Spock continue to work away. And I thought it was a briefing room we head back to, where McCoy enters and gives Kirk an update.
Whatever it is.
Yeah. On his current view on Daystrom and his way of thinking.
Biographical tape of Richard Daystrom.
Did you find out anything?
Not much, aside from the fact he's a genius.
Genius is an understatement. At the age of 24, he made the duotronic breakthrough that won him the Nobel and Z. Magny prizes.
In his early 20s, Jam. That's over a quarter of a century ago.
Isn't that enough for one lifetime?
Maybe that's the trouble. Where do you go from up? Publish articles, you give lectures, then you spend the rest of your life trying to recapture past glory.
All right, it's difficult. What's your point?
The M1 through M4, remember? Not entirely successful, that's the way Daystrom put it.
But genius doesn't work on an assembly line basis. Did Einstein, Kazanka, or Sitaro Vulcan produce new and revolutionary theories on a regular schedule? You can't simply say, today I will be brilliant. No matter how long it took, he came out with Multitronics, the M5.
Right, the government bought it, then Daystrom had to make it work, and he did. But according to Spock, it works illogically.
And he won't let Spock near it. What are you saying? That he's tampering with it? That he's making it act that way? Why?
Jim, if a man had a child who'd gone antisocial, killed perhaps, he'd still tend to protect that child.
Now he's got you talking about that machine like a personality.
I'm afraid that's the way he thinks about it.
Spock to Captain Kirk.
Kirk here.
We are ready, Captain.
Good. Get Daystrom. We're on our way. Let's go.
Out in the corridor at the end of the Jeffries tube where Spock and Scotty have been working, Daystrom and Kirk wait.
Yeah, they're about to override the M5, but at this, Daystrom freaks out.
Yes, he goes a little bit berserk, trying to physically stop them from intervening. Spock and Scotty think they've succeeded, but when Kirk orders Chekhov to plot a course back to the station, there's no success.
No, up on the bridge, an impish Chekhov confirms to a smiling Sulu, now they're both together in this episode, it's quite rare,
yeah.
that he heard the order and has been updating the course for hours. However, they find there is a problem, and Sulu communicates back down to tell Kirk that the navigation controls are still locked in by the M5.
Yeah, Spock has Chekhov go over to Scotty's station and he reports that the G95 system is dead.
Oof.
Spock concludes that M5 has led them on a wild goose hunt. Now, the last time this phrase came up, Spock didn't understand it, so obviously he's taken it on board.
He always likes a bit of self-improvement.
I'm sure. M5 has tricked them into thinking they were succeeding, but had in fact rerouted controls. Spock says it's not a logical thing to do.
Yeah, he's used the primary units as a decoy.
Yeah. Kirk asks Daystrom for answers, and Spock suggests the computer is behaving in a human fashion, or almost human fashion.
So Daystrom admits that he has been trying to counter the argument that computers don't think like humans by programming it to take on just such characteristics. That, to me, defeats the purpose. These characteristics are what make humans, but also fallible and weak sometimes.
Yeah. He's impressed human memory engrams onto the computer's circuits.
Uhura then communicates with an urgent message.
Yeah, we've got 4 Federation ships detected, and M5 has altered course to intercept.
Kirk mentions the war game, and McCoy notes that the M5 doesn't know it's a game, but Kirk corrects him. The 4 ships don't realise it's an M5 game, and it's going to destroy them.
Yeah, things have escalated. So obviously in the first trial it was happy enough to use 1% phasers, but they don't think that'll be the case now.
We then have a nice shot of the approaching ships. I assume that's a remaster?
I would imagine so, yes.
Okay, back in the bridge. A stressed Uhura unsuccessfully tries to communicate with the Lexington, but does receive an audio message from them advising that they are on an M5 drill.
Yep, and Uhura notes that M5 has acknowledged this message.
Yeah, and so Kirk asks Daystrom if the computer understands it is only a drill. And he's quite confidently, he responds.
Yeah, he says, definitely. The ore ship was either a miscalculation or an accident.
Yeah, he starts to ramble a bit before Chekhov lets them know that the deflector shield has came on and the speed is now increasing to warp 4.
Weapons are at full power, and Kirk says this is no miscalculation.
The M5 then starts firing at the unshielded ships.
Yep, on the Lexington, Wesley questions what Kirk is up to. Surely he knows it's not Kirk.
You'd assume that.
Yeah.
Is this Kirk, or has something went wrong with the computer that we have installed?
No, it's the children who are wrong. Chekhov, Spock and Sulu add reports for Kirk on how the battle is proceeding as we return to the Enterprise bridge.
Yeah, and it's also noted that there is possible damage to the Lexington's impulse engines.
Yeah.
As the Enterprise fires again, and this time gets the Excalibur with a direct hit. Now, unless it's a ricochet, what other type of hit can you get?
A glancing blow.
Still direct, isn't it?
Yeah, it means that it took the full force of the shot, I think. So the Enterprise closes again on the Lexington as the Hood and the Potemkin run away.
They do.
Kirk's getting a bit frantic himself now. He insists there must be a way to get through to M5, but Daystrom says it's fully protected itself.
Uhura then manages to get the Lexington on the screen, where we see a desperate Wesley ask them if they have gone mad, and gives the devastating news of the casualties.
Yeah, 65 people dead, 12 in the Excalibur and 53 in the Lexington.
Whoa, this isn't a minor mishap now, is it?
No. Kirk puts this to Daystrom as a murder charge, a deliberate and calculated killing of men and women, but Daystrom says it's a misunderstanding.
Yeah, he feebly tries to claim it was just this miscalculation, and then Chekhov informs them that the Excalibur is running away and they're now in pursuit.
Yes, the Enterprise is not going to let them get away, firing phasers on the Excalibur as it tries to leave the scene of the fight. Daystrom concedes at this point he does not know how to get through to M5, but Spock raises the question of the human engrams, and Kirk asks whose memory engrams were impressed on the system.
Yeah, Daystrom says it was programmed using his own engrams and has no reason to think he would harm it.
No, so Spock suggests he talks to it and see if they can reason with it.
And at this point, Uhura is able to connect to a message being sent from Wesley to the Federation, in which they hear him explain the situation and have a request for a worrying authorization.
Yeah, he wants permission to destroy the Enterprise because that's the only solution.
Back in the bridge, Daystrom's first reaction is that they will destroy the M5. He's a whack job now, Daystrom. Complete.
He's lost it, yeah. Kirk tells him he can stop this by talking to M5. So Daystrom begins a tie-in and tells M5 to break off the attacks.
Yeah, he says it can't go on, it's entitled to defend itself but not to kill. However, as he talks to it, Daystrom appears to finally lose touch with reality, and they are forced to take action.
The M5 is not responding. The computer is talking to me.
I am most impressed with the technology, Captain. Dr. Daystrom has created a mirror image of his own mind.
Consideration of all programming is that we must survive.
We will survive. Nothing can hurt you. I gave you that. You are great. I am great. 20 years of groping to prove the things I'd done before were not accidents. Seminars and lectures to rows of fools who couldn't begin to understand my systems. Colleagues laughing behind my back at the boy wonder. And becoming famous building on my work. Building on my work.
Jimmy's on the edge of a nervous breakdown, if not insanity.
The M5 must be destroyed.
Destroy it, Kirk? No. We're invincible. Look what we've done. Your mighty starships. More toys to be crushed as we choose.
Security. Take him to sick bay.
Daystrom there reminds me of two different people. Firstly, there's a touch of the Brian and Blessed about him, but there's a Columbo connection there as well, and what he was saying and how he sounded. If you remember the Bye Bye Sky High IQ murder,
Yeah.
with Oliver Brandt, played by I think it was Theodore Bickle, he speaks to Columbo about how, as a genius, people assume that it was a great life and an easy life, but he talks about how other kids would bully him, the expectations were huge, and actually it's more of a burden than a blessing, and that sort of reminded me. It actually sounds quite a bit like him as well.
Pretty sure Bickle was in Next Generation.
I can believe that. He's in a lot of things.
Yeah.
I like him. It's good.
Yeah, good actor.
Anyway, where were we?
Daystrom's getting carried off the bridge, unconscious, having been nerve pinched by Spock just at the end of that clip. And Kirk sends McCoy with him.
Yeah, before he takes his seat on the in the captain's chair.
Yes, Sulu reports that the other three ships are holding station out of range, but the Excalibur looks dead in the water.
Ahura picks up the response message from Starfleet at this point, and it's not good news.
No, Starfleet has authorised the Lexington to take all measures to destroy the Enterprise, and Kirk thinks they've signed their own death warrant.
Yes, as the M5 will kill them to survive, and Spock states that this survival instinct must have been impressed upon it by Daystrom, which gives Kirk an idea.
Yes, he wonders if M5 might be able to be made to feel regret for causing these deaths, or some kind of guilt at least.
But just then the Lexington comes into range, and so Kirk rolls the dice and speaks to the M5.
Just before he does, though, we get Spock finishing off a thought that you raised earlier on when he notes it would be very sad to be on the ship that killed Commodore Wesley.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Kirk tries to tie into M5, and we've seen this before when he talked to Landru, when he talked to other computers and convinced them to kill themselves. And
he's a bit like a Hannibal Lecter character.
He's like a computer whisperer.
Okay.
But in a way that makes them commit suicide.
Yeah, like Hannibal Lecter.
He talks to
Migs, multiple Migs. Do you remember him? No?
Vaguely.
Oh, okay.
See the guy in the cell next to him?
Yep. You don't want to catch anything he throws for sure.
No, you do not. Especially if you're Jodie Foster. Anyway, he talks to the computer about the lives that it cost when it made the earlier attack, and it says it must survive. And Kirk raises a very important question.
What's that?
Why? And it says that it's the ultimate achievement in computer evolution, that it must survive so that man may be protected. Spock at this point notes the other ships are in phaser range, but Kirk continues the conversation.
Go on.
He says the men in those ships were murdered, and M5 comes up with a bizarre comment which must be straight out of Daystrom's own morality when it says it cannot murder, as that is contrary to the laws of man and God.
Yeah.
The computer god?
Exactly.
Bill Gates. Kirk has M5 scan Excalibur and it records everybody's dead. They're all dead.
I've got an issue with what he says next.
He says that M5 murdered those people, and M5 says that the penalty for murder, and again I think this is Daystrom's own morality rather than any law, is death. So the unit must die. Now,
you see, that's the question I had. You know, it gives a very specific punishment for murder, but that would only apply to either a state in the US or a country around the world. I mean, so what law are they taking this from?
I think this is Daystrom's morality. I think this is the computer has Daystrom's mindset as perspective on these things.
It's quite worrying then that even in 300 years' time, whenever this is, that death is still a punishment that's being used.
Well, I don't think it is being used. I think that's just his own personal morality. I don't think he believes that should be the punishment.
Really, but if we're talking 300 years and it's not been a punishment, it'd be very odd, I think, because there are very few people even today in this country who would think that death's a...
He's obviously a religious zealot. He talks about the laws of man and God.
Yeah.
And I think what's happened here is that Daystrom tried to develop artificially a computer that can make all these decisions and think in this when he's failed. So he's cheated. He's basically taken his own memory engrams, and instead of being able to replicate them artificially, he's just implanted them directly. So it's like it's not been developed in an artificial and sterile environment. It's been developed in this sort of very subjective way with his own slants and biases and feelings and beliefs. So that's why it comes to these extreme conclusions.
Sure. So yeah, anyway, the computer thinks it has to kill itself.
Well, no, it's going to let somebody else do it for it.
Yeah, well, okay, it's suicide by...
proxy.
Yeah, what is it? Suicide by Starship.
Lexington, yeah. So it drops the shields and the phasers, and Kirk sends Scotty and Spock down to engineering to pull the plug.
Yeah, he then puts out quite a downer of a ship-wide communication.
Soon we will all be dead.
You can just see them all stripping down, going for, oh, quick, let's all get to it, let's all get dirty.
He starts off with a high. He says, the M5 no longer controls the ship. Hey, but neither do we. Oh.
Yeah. So Scotty's assaulting women all left, right and centre at this point. There's only a minute to go. Give me a you.
He's like, I hope it makes you feel better. But our lives... I like the fact he says 19 because they had 20 and one got killed already. Our 19 lives will buy the survival of over 1,000 of our fellow Starship crewmen.
Don't care about them. I'd rather survive. Down in engineering, Spock and Scotty confirm that the M5 is no longer in control, but that bringing communications back is going to take a bit longer, which is obviously an issue because they can't tell the Lexington to...
In the middle of that conversation, we get a shot of Wesley on the Lexington saying he's got his phasers locked on target.
And so, to their surprise, Kirk orders what?
Complete shutdown. We've seen this before in Balance of Terror, I think. Mm-hmm. He faked it, that they were shut down so he could trick the enemy. In this case, it's to try and show, I think, the Lexington that they're not a threat. Yes,
I think what he's trying to do is, it's not... This decision hasn't been made by a computer, which wouldn't do this. He's showing there's some sort of humanistic thinking behind it. Yeah, so it's shutting everything down and keeping down the shields.
Yes, so Wesley sees this from the Lexington and decides to believe it's not a trap being laid by M5.
Just as well, eh?
Yeah, he contacts the attack force, and Uhura pipes what Wesley's saying through to the Enterprise as he instructs them to break off and hold position.
We then find ourselves sometime later in sickbay where McCoy tells Kirk and Spock that the sedated Daystrom will need to undergo a complete rehabilitation, and Spock thinks that the M5 should also follow this course of action.
Kirk says that last thing is what he was hoping for. They then go through to McCoy's office where Kirk says that the M5 carried Daystrom's morality, and Spock asks why did Kirk feel the attack would be called off and not assumed to be a trap.
Yeah, and as we said, Kirk says that it was because he knew that Wesley would gamble on his humanity, and his logical selection was compassion.
Yeah, basically, he knows him, and he trusted he would take that decision, and it couldn't be any worse.
McCoy responds by saying that compassion is one attribute a machine doesn't have, and one thing that keeps man ahead of them.
Yeah, he starts another fight with Spock at this point, trying to debate the point, and
he's always trying to pick a fight, isn't he?
Well, it goes both ways. They both do. Spock was doing it at the start of the episode. Spock at this point declines to debate the point, indicating that he simply maintains that computers are more efficient than humans, not better. And when McCoy asks which one he prefers, he says he's already answered that question.
Mm-hmm.
We then get a jibe from Spock to finish up, as McCoy says he was just making conversation, and Spock responds that it would be most interesting to impress your memory engrams on a computer, Doctor, as the resulting torrential flood of illogic would be very entertaining.
And back on the bridge, a smiling Kirk tells Sulu to take them back to the space station, and we head off for another adventure.
As we do. Do you feel bad for either Daystrom or M5?
No, I think I don't feel bad at all. I mean, I feel that
we kind of skimmed over the bit where he gave the reason that he was so invested in the project.
What was that?
It was because he'd come up with this fantastic invention in his early 20s, and then he'd never come up with anything as good since, and all his other colleagues were iterating on his developments and getting credit for it, and he wasn't able. He felt he had to come up with something big again, and this was his one.
Well, we
big
might
shot
have
at
skipped
this.
over it, but it was in one of the clips where McCoy was explaining this.
Yeah.
No, I don't feel sorry for him. I feel sorry that progress has been hampered here because of Daystrom and
Cutting corners,
yeah, which the confidence will have been lost in
that'll
this.
set that project back decades, probably.
It will do, yeah. I think he was a bit of a weirdo and a bit of an oddball, and I think mentally unwell. I think he liked his machine, loved his machine too much, and I think he needs some medication and he needs to get out of the game. I think he needs to retire from this now. It's not healthy.
Do you think it was inevitable that M5 would fail on the basis it had been constructed?
Within the context of this episode, do you mean?
Yeah, like the way that Daystrom built the computer, could it have succeeded?
Yeah, I think it could have. I don't think it was inevitable.
And if he could have built a computer that worked the way he intended it to work, would that be desirable?
Yeah, but not M5. It would probably need to be M100.
Yeah, later on.
Yeah. But I think he's going the right path, and I think the management from the Federation was suspect, to say the least, in this episode. I don't think it was communicated appropriately to Kirk and the rest of the crew of the Enterprise what was happening, why it was happening. You're making massive decisions which will have, if things go well, will make these people redundant. I think you need to explain what's happening and why, and what you go through the processes of what will happen to you going forward to make everyone comfortable with it. You don't turn up and say, we're doing this and you probably lose your job, because you're only encouraging them. You saw that. Kirk, there was no buy-in. They wanted
to undermine it.
They wanted it to fail.
Yeah. Any other thoughts?
No, good episode. I think it was, again, this is probably an episode which, prior to watching Star Trek, would be the type of thing I would have.
Yeah.
Not so much the Nazis and the gangsters. This is more of what I would think is a stereotypical type of Star Trek sci-fi storyline.
Again, it's a cheap one. It's almost a bottle show. You're not off the Enterprise apart from the brief shot of the Lexington Bridge every now and then.
Sure.
So there's an interesting story behind where it came from as well that we'll get to shortly.
Okay, well, let's do that. It's quite a long episode already.
Yeah, okay, so originally aired on the 8th of March 1968. Director was John Meredith Lucas. So we've talked about him previously as a producer and a writer for the show, and this is the first of 3 stints behind the camera. If you want to hear a bit more about him, there's another robot episode. You go back to the Changeling podcast, you hear about him there. So the writer for this was Lawrence N. Wolfe. He's a mathematician. Never wrote anything else for anybody else. This is his only credit on IMDb.
How did he get this gig?
I think he submitted it on spec and they kind of rewrote his story a little bit.
That's alright, isn't it?
Yeah. Dorothy Fontana put the teleplay together based on his mathematician-based story.
That happened in an episode of Columbo. I think it was either 2 or 3 women who wrote one episode of Columbo and never done anything again.
We spoke to one of them on Twitter, remember?
Yeah.
William Marshall played Dr. Richard Daystrom. This was his only Star Trek appearance, but he also appeared in shows like Bonanza, The Man from U.N.C.L.E. and Mannix, as well as a 4-year stint as the King of Cartoons on Pee-wee's Playhouse.
Ah, yes. I watched that about a year ago, but went through a little period watching it with the kids, yeah.
There you go. Yeah. He died in 2003 when he was 78.
Good screen presence. He's a bit of charisma there.
Yeah, I think they talked about this role. He said that it was quite an important role in the fact that everyone called him Sir during it, was in terms of civil rights and so on. It was quite a big deal. Barry Russo played Commodore Bob Wesley. You've seen him before. This is his second appearance. He was the head security guy in Devil in the Dark. And if you want to hear more about him, go back to that podcast. That was really it. No Columbo connection this week.
Foreign language?
We'll come on to some other this trivia. So M5 and the Starbase officer that you heard right at the start, they were both voiced by James Doohan. Almost all future Star Trek series make prominent reference to the Daystrom Institute, which is a scientific research facility on Earth named after Richard Daystrom. So whether his involvement in this gets whitewashed later on or he has further inventions in the future, you can make up in your own mind, I guess. 4th episode where Kirk manages to outwit a computer. Can you name the other 3?
Nope.
Changeling, Return of the Archons, IMUD.
There you go.
Episode was intended as a social commentary on the American job losses caused by increased mechanization in the 1960s.
I felt like that, yeah.
It was quite on the nose, I think, a couple of things that McCoy said.
But as I'm saying, their attitudes were of that period.
Yeah. And in terms of international titles, the Italians opted for Il Computer che Uccide, which means the computer that kills. And in Japan, it was Kyofu no Computer M5. it probably wasn't M5, whatever Japanese for M5 is, which is a fearful computer M5. It was trying to protect itself, it was scared. Next week, 25th episode of Season 2, I think the penultimate episode of Season 2, Bread and Circuses, featuring some superficial appeasements. And in the meantime, you can find us on social media. We're at Trek Podcast, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, StarTrekPodcast.com, post about the show, and you can listen to this on YouTube as well if you prefer.
Until then,
cheerio.
Bye bye.